Now, Peter Joseph of the Zeitgeist movement has never called for violence or coercion, and I've never accused him of calling for violence and coercion. However, if his followers ever get the chance to put the philosophy that he advocates into action, it will lead to violence. Now, in order to understand why, you have to take a good, hard, honest look at property rights. Now, the obvious problem which arises when you look at their prescription, which calls for 100% control of the world's resources, is that those resources are on land, and that land is owned by people. Now, the underlying question, which should be very obvious, I keep proposing to people in the comment section, what do you do to the people who don't want to actually give up their property? Whether that property is land, factories, or any other kind of infrastructure. Now, most people try to skirt around the issue, but I got a couple comments that were actually pretty honest. Now, this comment was posted by Evil Genius 747, and he answers, what about the people who want to keep the land for themselves? And in big capital letters he writes, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Now, I'm going to gloss over the fact that this is a quote from a science fiction series, and I'm going to jump right into the implications of what this guy is actually saying. Now, what you're making really clear here is that you don't care about property rights, and that if you want something, you're going to come and take it because you're with the many and I'm with the few, and you got needs. Now, if you really can't see how this would lead to violence, then maybe you should come to Texas and give it a little trial run. And there was another comment posted by World Watch 100, which makes it ever so clear what's at stake here. And he writes, unfortunately, people like you will be forced to participate in a resource-based economy, the same way that billions of people are forced to participate in a deadly monetary system. All right, now that we got it out in the open, how? How are you going to force me to comply? You guys are going to face armed resistance. So are you going to build an army? Do you have the guts to pull the trigger? Because that's what it's going to take. And you do realize if it comes to that, then your whole idea of being a non-violent, voluntary society is out the window. You will have just created a violent, totalitarian dictatorship of epic proportions. Now, it seems to me that you guys have the impression that this is going to have a better outcome if it all goes down after rule of law is gone. And I actually have a comment here that was posted on that video which pretty clearly illustrates that perspective. And this was posted by World at Large 77. And he says, you obviously don't get the point of the documentary. If people don't give up their ideas of ownership and don't feel like converting to a more singular and community-based world, your opinion won't even exist, because you'll be dead. This species is doing a pretty shitty job of maintaining its future. Now, the fact that you would say something like this in itself is pretty revealing, but I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and just deal with your argument at face value. Where on earth did you get the idea that you and the Zeitgeist followers are somehow going to survive this cataclysm that's heading our way, while people like me, who believe in personal liberty and property rights, would just be dead? See, I own farmland. I have heirloom seeds. I've worked on farms. I was raised hunting and fishing. I know how to recognize edible plants. And I have the means and the will to defend my property and my family if it ever comes to that. And I hope it doesn't. So what about you? How prepared are you for what's coming? I get the impression, based on your comments, that you guys aren't preparing at all. I also get the impression that you wouldn't know how to find or produce food for yourselves in a natural environment. By my calculations, the people who think like me, who take responsibility for their livelihood, are much more likely to survive. The way I see it, if you see this disaster coming and you're doing nothing to get ready for it, then that's just irresponsible. And if you think you're going to get by just taking from other people what they've accumulated during this time that they're preparing, then that's criminal. The thing is, a scenario like that will lead to violence, whether you say you want violence or not. And if it's you that's walking onto someone's land with the intention of taking it, then you really don't have much room to complain when you end up getting shot. And really, I'm doing you guys a favor by telling you this, because that's how it would end. You may not care about property rights, but you're not the one with the property. Now, there's a pretty common response that people keep coming back to me with in the personal messages and the comments. And I have a pretty good example of it right here in this comment that was posted by Colleen FR. And she says, question is, why would you not want to live in a resource-based economy? Then we can continue our conversation. No. Someone you don't know walks up to you, asks you for the keys to your car. You say no, and then they demand an explanation? Quite frankly, I'm astounded that you would think that that's a tenable position. No one should have to justify why they don't want the fruits of their labor taken from them. That should just be common sense. But you know, common sense seems to be pretty lacking in the religion that the Zeitgeist movement has become. Now let's just take a second and review the facts at hand and see how we got here. Fact number 1, the resource-based economy calls for and requires 100% control of all the world's resources, production, and distribution. And all this would be run by some kind of supercomputer. Fact number 2, the infrastructure that you would need to take control of in order to do this is already owned by somebody else. And to get from point A, which is where we are right now, to point B, which would be this total control system, either somehow magically all of us who don't believe in the Zeitgeist vision suddenly die off, leaving you guys behind untouched, or you're going to have to take our land. You're You're going to have to take our factories. You're going to have to take our mines and our farms, our stores, and even our equipment. And if you don't think that that's going to lead to violence, you're in for a very rude awakening. This is a video response and a challenge to Peter Joseph based on his reply to Stefan Molyneux. Both videos will be linked below, and any and all video responses will be accepted. Now, as I was listening to both sides of this debate, I was first allowing myself to be drawn into the details of each position. But then I took a step back and I looked at it, and I realized that the key is not in what's being said, but rather in what's being left out. Peter Joseph's argument is delivered as a multiple choice question. Either A, you support the current system and the paradigm which created it, or B, we move to his resource-based economy with everything that comes with it, including a computerized control grid which will dictate how every square inch of land and resource is utilized. Now, this is a clear example of a false dichotomy, also known as the false dilemma logical fallacy. It should be obvious to everyone that there's more than two choices. And just because you haven't heard someone propose the choice that you like is irrelevant. It is still intellectually dishonest and, in fact, dangerous to pretend that you have the one and only way. Now, we both agree that the current system is doomed. So let's not waste time defending a dead horse or accusing me of defending it. This system will most likely collapse in our lifetime. What's at stake is what will grow up or be instituted to replace the current system. My position is this. The system that you propose would not only fall short of the promises that it offers for those that are desperate for hope, but would in fact lead to an even darker and more oppressive system than the one we have right now. And I'm going to explain why. But before I do, I'm going to play a short clip just so we're clear where we're starting from.
You know, you can always tell when someone's nervous about a particular subject by the way they color their responses, especially if they present ego and they start to use sarcasm, and it's a very revealing thing to show the insecurity of the individual.
All right, those are your words. Now let's apply them to the following clip taken 2 hours and 12 minutes into the new Zeitgeist film.
When we consider a resource-based economy, there are often a number of arguments that tend to come up with regard to the efficiency.
Now hold on just a minute.
Yes?
I know what this is. This is called Marxism, buddy. Stalin killed 800 billion people because of ideas like this.
My father died in the gulag.
Hold on.
Communist,
Fascist. You don't like America, you should just leave.
All right, everybody just calm down.
the New World Order. Death to the New World Order. And as the irrationality of the audience grew, shocked and confused, suddenly the narrator suffered a fatal heart attack. And the seemingly communist propaganda film was no more.
Now, if you watch this film, consider the context and take a second to ask yourself, what's hiding behind Peter's sarcasm in this scene? He's resorting to mockery, and he's using it to avoid a very important question: control. In this future world that you claim is inevitable, all resources, all production, every square inch of what we currently think of as property would be controlled by a supercomputer. But who programs that computer? And who decides how that computer is programmed? Those people, whether you're willing to name them or not, will in fact be the ones who decide how resources are used. They will have the power of life and death over every person on this planet. And I know you hold out the hope that humans will evolve to a point where they can be trusted with such power. However, we can't count on what people may theoretically become someday. We have to deal with humans as they are right now. And right now, there's a certain percentage of humans that are drawn to power and will grab it if the chance arises. Now, I can imagine you responding by saying that a state of abundance would eliminate these tendencies. But if that's the case, I would challenge you to explain why the worst of these criminally insane men, which currently control our world, come from the world's richest families. To place all of humanity at the whims of a single system that could easily be seized by a determined maniac would be criminally negligent and utterly naive. You cannot stand before us and honestly promise that another Hitler-type individual will never be born on this planet again. You cannot control every parent. You cannot control every childhood, and you will never eliminate anomalies. Moreover, such a system would be the equivalent of monoculture farming. Planting all your fields with only one type of crop reduces biodiversity, and in the process creates a very fragile system. Economies, just like ecosystems, are much less likely to collapse entirely if there's variety. There's also another nagging problem. Your entire theory runs on the premise that you will eventually convert everybody to this way of thinking, or at least most of us. But the reality is, even a simple 51% majority is out of reach. There's whole sections of the planet who aren't interested and who'll never be interested, and who in fact will never be exposed to what you have to say. Will you send missionaries into Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Zimbabwe, and the Amazon like the Christians did? Anyone who's lived any period of time outside of our comfortable Western culture understands just how arrogant such a proposition sounds. If you did that, you would be no better than the rest of the European colonists who waltzed into countries that they didn't understand and then summarily destroyed their culture. And make no mistake, livelihood is part of culture. Land ownership is part of culture. I've posted an official challenge to Peter Joseph on a separate video, demanding an explanation of how those who don't go along with this program will be dealt with if no force is going to be used. So far, I haven't gotten a real answer yet. In the meantime, I think we've established that the official resource-based economy that's promoted in the Zeitgeist film has real and legitimate problems. Those problems are not minor details that can be glossed over or fixed at a later date. They are, in fact, inherent design flaws, which render it unworkable. This is a response to the recent video released by the TZM official channel entitled RBE Concepts, Why We Are Not Building Cities. In their video, the TZM official channel spends some time going through a set of justifications for why they're not building cities or communities. I'm going to go through some of these and demonstrate why this position is unscientific and why it breeds distrust for their movement. In part 2 of the series, they state the following. There's a high chance that there will be scarcity in this scenario, which would not be a good representation of the Venus Project, since the aim of the Venus Project is to consider all the world's resources. As I've said before, the resource-based economy model right now is nothing more than a hypothesis. It has never been tested, and therefore there really is no proof whatsoever that it would work on any scale, much less a global scale. What you're proposing by insisting that we try this on a global level first is nothing short of taking an experimental medication and distributing it to the public at large without so much as seeing what it does to rats. That's not scientific, and it's dangerous. If you fail on a global scale, then the consequences will be global. Furthermore, it seems to me that the movement is more concerned about the damage to its image which may result from having a test case fail than it is in actually finding out what would actually work. Failure is a part of science. You should embrace it. It should be a clearly stated position of your movement that it will most assuredly fail in the first several attempts. Do you really think that Edison would have invented the light bulb if he had insisted on never making an attempt that went awry? Failure is how science discovers what doesn't work. And when you know one thing that doesn't work, you're that much closer to discovering an approach that will. I've heard the argument made that you guys need enough of the right kind of people thinking in the right way in order for the resource-based economy to work. But at the same time, you assert that it's this resource-based economy which will fix the fundamental human problems which would normally keep the resource-based economy from working. That sounds like circular logic to me. Any solution that's going to change the direction of society has to start with humans as they are right now. And quite frankly, if your solution doesn't handle people in their current state, then it's really not a solution at all. Now, I'm familiar with the typical rebuttals that technology is going to fix all this. But from my experience, having lived in communes and intentional communities, what makes or breaks a community is the human element. It's the decision-making process, the dispute resolution process, the rules and bylaws and how they're implemented. This is difficult stuff, and if you as a movement aren't able to demonstrate that you've mastered these principles in small groups in long-term living situations, then people like me who've actually participated in that kind of living environment are going to be very skeptical that you're capable of pulling it off. You need to remember that the burden of proof falls squarely on your shoulders. Those of us who are looking at this from the outside are not impressed with mock-ups or theoretical solutions. We want to see proof. And a lot of people are going to be a lot less polite than me if you don't provide it.